We're talking today with Bob Worrall of Fair Oaks Ranch, Texas, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Bob, begin with a little bit of background on yourself, to start with where and when were you born?
I was born in 1945 in Birmingham, Alabama. My father, who has the same name with a different middle name, Lloyd instead of Lee, was a pilot flying P-51s in World War II, and he was overseas when I was born. Grew up as a military brat in the Air Force. Actually graduated from high school in Tripoli, Libya. My father was assigned to Eglin Air Base over there back when the Americans and the Libyans were friendly, and graduated from Eglin Dependence High School in 1963. Attended the University of Alabama and graduated with honors in 1967. The plan was to become a doctor. I graduated with a pre-medical degree. Went to the Medical College of Alabama, and things didn't quite work out the way that I'd hoped, and within a couple of weeks after leaving medical school, I received my draft card status being changed from 2S, which is a student deferment, to 1A, which is you're ready to go to Vietnam.
Right.
I started looking around for commissioning opportunities. None of the services had any commissioning opportunities except the United States Army, and the only branch that they were interested in talking to you about was infantry. So my choices were to face the inevitable draft as a private E1 and go to Vietnam, or be a volunteer and go on what was called the College Op OCS program, which meant that I volunteered to go into the Army, went to basic training and AIT just like any other new soldier would have. And if I completed those two successfully, I was guaranteed a slot in the Infantry Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning, Georgia, which I began in September of 1968.
Okay, so let us then back up a little bit. So where did you go for basic training?
I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. I was living in Birmingham at the time, and I think the Army tried to send you as far away from where you lived as they could so you wouldn't change your mind and run away in the middle of the night. So I was in Fort Dix, New Jersey. Got there in April. It was very cold. Within about a month and a half, it was very hot. And I went through 8 weeks of basic and then 8 weeks of AIT.
Okay. Now, a lot of people today, most people today have not served at all. You can assume they know what basic training is, but you can't always assume that. So for you, what did basic training consist of?
For me and for everybody else, it was a way to bring a civilian mentality, young person in, break them down, build them back up as an Army soldier.
So how do they do that?
Well, they make you as miserable as they can. Everything's fine until you get off the bus, and then you got people yelling and screaming at you, much like the movie Full Metal Jacket. And you go through a whole process of getting your head shaved or nearly shaved, and getting issued olive drab clothing, and living with 30 or 40 other people in a barracks, and getting up early in the morning and being yelled at all day, and going to bed tired at night and doing the same thing the next day. So.
All right. Now, were you kind of the old guy in your group?
I was. At that time, I was, I think, 23, and the service numbers at that time were not the Social Security number. There was actually a service number that you were given, and the draftees, their number was preceded by U.S., and the folks who enlisted voluntarily, theirs was preceded by RA, or regular Army. So you had to holler out your number every time you went through a line or got up to do exercises, and they always identified the RAs as lifers, and the draftees would look at the RAs, particularly the older ones like me, like, you got to be crazy. But they didn't know the whole story.
All right. Now, did you have any advantage from having been out of the military family in terms of knowing what you were going to get into?
Not really. I think being a service brat, you don't see that part of the military. And the Air Force is very different
Yes.
than the Army, so.
Yeah, that is a different culture. Okay. Now, what happened when people messed up in basic training?
Usually they got dropped for push-ups, and that was just commonplace.
Mm-hmm.
And matter of fact, all the way through the Army, whether it was basic training, AIT, Officer Candidate School, Jump School, Ranger School, whatever, if you didn't know how to do push-ups, you
weren't going anywhere.
You weren't going anywhere.
All right. So did many people wash out of basic training, or get recycled, or?
I don't think washout really applied to basic training as much as it did other schools that I was in later. The folks who didn't make it through basic training usually had some kind of medical problem,
Mm-hmm.
flat feet, or they broke a bone,
Mm-hmm.
or had influenza really badly. They call it upper respiratory infection
Right.
at that point.
Yeah. So in those cases, they might go and start with another class.
Recycle.
Yeah,
Yes,
and you go that
recycle.
way. Okay. And how long was the basic?
I think it was about 8 weeks.
Yes, that was the standard. Okay. And then you had advanced individual training, and was that going to be for infantry?
It was, and it was at the same location, Fort Dix, New Jersey. I think I had either a weekend or a week in between. I think it was a weekend. I think I graduated on a Friday and started on a Monday.
All right.
So,
Now, how was AIT different from basic?
they still tried to break you down at the beginning, like all schools do, and then build you back up. But it wasn't quite as intense as basic because the culture, you already knew how to dress, to salute, how to talk to NCOs and officers, and so it wasn't quite that big of a culture change, but it was still fairly intense.
Okay. But for the training itself, I mean, how was the training different from just basic?
Didn't spend quite as much time marching, spent more time in weapons training, all through basic and AIT and OCS as well. Carried the M14 weapon, which was kind of the next generation of the M1 Garand from World War II, and it was more of a Korean War weapon than a Vietnam War weapon. Of course, all of the M16s were over in Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
so the trainees got the M14s, and it was heavier, so you got more bodybuilding
Mm-hmm.
by marching around with the M14 than you would an M16.
Yep. All right. And that's another 8 weeks?
That was another 8 weeks, and by that time in Fort Dix, it was quite hot. Fort Dix is in New Jersey, and I think most of it had been underwater at some point in its history because it was all white sand, so the radiation of sunbeams coming up through you would wilt you pretty quickly.
Well, that was preparation for certain parts of Vietnam.
Well, yes, yes.
All right. Now, do you get a break, or do you go straight down to OCS after that?
Well, I actually had 2 weeks leave, and I got married over the break.
Okay.
My fiance and I had been planning to do that all along. We were looking for a break, and we knew that OCS was 6 months, and there would be no break
Mm-hmm.
during OCS. So I graduated from AIT, flew to Grand Island, Nebraska, which is where my fiance grew up, and got married, and then drove to my parents' home in Fort Walton Beach, and had a very brief 2 or 3 day honeymoon before I reported in for Officer Candidate School.
Okay. And so where did your wife stay while you were training?
She had, well, OCS is 6 months, so we got married in August of '68, and she had just finished a dietetic internship at the university hospitals in Birmingham, and she had an apartment there and a job.
Mm-hmm.
So she stayed there while I was in OCS. I don't think I saw her until about the 10th week, and I had a weekend, not liberty or pass, but you were allowed to go to church services,
Mm-hmm.
and she drove down from Birmingham to Fort Benning, and we went to church, and that was the extent of our visit that weekend.
Wow. All right. So talk about officer candidate school. What was that like?
Very intense. Probably only exceeded by the intensity of Ranger School.
Mm-hmm.
Officer Candidate School, they were absolutely trying to break you down and trying to get you to quit. I think my class started with around 200 organized into 4 platoons. That's a bit much, probably 160 organized into 4 platoons. And we graduated about half of that, 2/3, half to 2/3. And they were looking to weed out the ones that just could not hack it and didn't have the physical stamina, didn't have the mental capacity to pass the examinations or the discipline to take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right. And then what kinds of actual like field training did you get?
in OCS you got the full range. I mean, they took you from problem solving, which was one of the very first ones where they organize you into groups, and the group was presented with a problem, a stream crossing, a bridge building, I can't think of the exact kind of challenges that they gave you, but they were looking for, could you work together with others? Could you help organize others to face a problem? Could you come up with ideas? Could you solve the problem? Could you succeed? And, it wasn't rocket science,
Mm-hmm.
but you needed to have those capabilities for them to want you as an officer.
Okay. Did your college training or whatever help you in one way or another, just in terms of critical thinking or anything like that?
I don't think so, but it probably did, because in college you had to, organize your time, figure out your plan of attack to get ready for an examination or to write a paper, and so I'm sure that must have helped a little bit. But
Of course, most of the group in your class would have been college graduates, because that was, or were you also coming up performer enlisted, or?
Yes. As a matter of fact, our distinguished graduate was a staff sergeant, I believe, with Vietnam experience, whose last name I believe was Toten, T-O-T-E-N, and the TAC officers who were running each platoon and running the company, they just zeroed right in on him because he knew the drill, he knew how to organize people, he wasn't afraid of anything, and he commanded respect. And so he was just a natural leader, and as a distinguished graduate he got choice of assignments. I don't think he stayed infantry. I think he got a branch change out of that.
Why not? But you survived all of that.
I did. I think I graduated in the top 30% of my class. I had a decision to make. As being a top 30% graduate, I could have selected a regular Army commission, or I could have taken the reserve commission. And the decision I made turned out not to be the right one later on, because I wanted a regular commission later on, and I couldn't get it because Vietnam War was winding down in 1972. There were way too many captains and majors in the Army, and you just could not get a regular commission. So instead of getting a regular commission, I said, I'll go to jump school. Oh, okay, we'll send you to jump school. So I graduated on a Friday. My father and mother came up from Fort Walton Beach. He was in uniform, pinned my butter bars on as a second lieutenant. And Monday I reported into jump school.
Okay, so why did you decide to go to jump school?
They paid $110 a month more.
Okay.
$110 a month in 1968 was a lot of money.
Okay. And so what did jump school consist of?
It was 3 weeks. 3 weeks, very tame compared to OCS and compared to what I would go through in Ranger School after jump school. As an officer, I did not have to stay in the barracks. My wife at that point in time was still in Birmingham. She got a job down in Fort Benning after I got a permanent assignment there for about a 6-month period of time. And so I could stay at home with her and drive in for training in the morning and go back home for supper in the evening, which is a great deal. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't show up in time for formation and march to training. Jump school was more of the abusement up front, push-ups, pull-ups, getting hollered at, running to class. But the first week was basically physical training and learning how to do parachute landing falls, learning how to get in the harness and all that sort of thing. And it's pretty intense first week. And the second week was called Tower Week, and you did a little bit more training, except later in the week you were actually hauled up. If you've seen pictures of Fort Benning, they have these, I think there were 4 of them, at least 3 or 4 towers that went up about 300 feet in the air, and they would put a parachute canopy underneath something that they could attach the edges of it to, and they would haul you up and release you. And it gave you a real life floating down, taking up a proper parachute landing fall, and getting yelled at on the ground when you did your PLF. So everybody was required to do, I think, at least 1 or 2 of those during Tower Week. And the third week was Jump Week. You got more training during the morning. In the afternoon, you got jump every day of Jump Week. So at that time, they were using C-119s, which is an old World War II twin tail boom aircraft, piston aircraft. Great jumping aircraft because there's nothing interfering your way. When you jumped out the door, there's nothing there but air, which was great. So we got 3 what were called Hollywood jumps at the beginning, which is all you're wearing is your parachute, your reserve, and your fatigues. You don't have any equipment on. And then the 4th day, they gave you an equipment jump where you actually had to put a rifle along your leg, and you carried a bag which had a name, and I can't think of it.
Is that a musette bag or?
Probably.
Oh. So that's what they called in World War II, a big bag of stuff.
Yeah, when you got down close to the ground, you unleashed or untied the quick release. A line let the bag drop below your feet so it wouldn't break your legs when you landed. The bag landed first, and then your feet landed, and you were okay. And then the 5th day, we had a real treat. We had a C-141 4-engine jet to take us up and get a jump out of that. I think that's the first time and only time I ever jumped a jet. And the main difference is on a piston aircraft, you actually stand in the door and you pull yourself out and you thrust yourself out. In the jet, you just stand in the door and stick your foot out, and it sucks you right out of the aircraft. It's a different feeling altogether.
So you didn't do a night jump?
I don't recall doing a night jump there. I did a night jump in Ranger School, but I didn't do a night jump there.
Okay. So you have the 3 weeks of jump school. You get through that. You didn't break anything.
Didn't break anything, and I got assigned to the jump battalion as an administrative officer. So until I got my orders for Vietnam, I was still there in the jump school area, but I was doing paperwork, additional assignments from the company commanders.
And did you do Ranger School at some point?
About 3 or 4 months after having this job as an administrative officer, the company commander called me in his office and said, "Lieutenant Worrall, I got a call from brigade today, and your orders are being cut for Vietnam." And I said, "Oh," and everybody knew it was coming.
Yeah.
There's no way that you're not getting orders for Vietnam. I said, "Okay, sir, do you have any recommendations?" And he said, "Well, before I went to Vietnam, I went to Ranger School, and if there's any one thing that I can point to, any one training that I had that helped me out when I got to Vietnam, it was Ranger School." I said, I don't have orders for that, sir. He said, I know a few people. If you're interested in going, I can get you a 2-month deferral en route to Vietnam to go to Ranger School. So I went home and talked to my wife about it that evening, and we both agreed that sounded like a smart thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So he got me orders for Ranger School, and I reported in there. I think it was August 1969, and that was a 2-month program.
Okay. And then was that based at Fort Benning, or did they move you around?
Yes, sir. Ranger School at that point in time had 3 locations. Fort Benning was the first 2.5 weeks. Then they sent you to Fort Dahlonega, or Camp Dahlonega, which is in northeastern Georgia, to do mountain training and patrolling. And then out of Dahlonega, you went to Eglin Air Force Base. The Florida Ranger Camp was down there, and they taught swamp training, water training, and small unit tactics against a guerrilla force.
Mm-hmm.
All that stuff is good stuff
Yeah.
to have going to Vietnam. And as I mentioned before, I eventually, after Vietnam, went back to the Florida Ranger Camp, and I was an instructor in counter-guerrilla tactics there for about 1.5 years.
All right. So that feels okay. And then when you're going through that, was that also a program that would weed out a lot of people, or did most of you make it?
That weeded out a whole lot of people. And not quite as severe as the Navy's SEAL training, but it was designed to break you down, tear you apart. From the day you started until you finished, you probably averaged 2 to 3 hours of sleep a day, and 1 meal a day. And I started at 190 pounds. I think I was 170 pounds, and looking pretty bad at the end of Ranger training. And they do keep you going. The binning phase was more weeding you out. That included all the calisthenics. There were 5-mile runs and forced marches, and that sort of thing. But they started grading you as a leader there by putting you in charge of a platoon or a unit for an assignment. And you'd have some assignment to take the platoon or patrol and go from point A to point B, grid coordinates, and conduct some kind of an operation, attack a missile base, attack an enemy position, see what was going on there and report back. They would give you those commands. And there were 2 instructors that would go with the platoon. I'm going to have to get back to him. That's my platoon sergeant from Vietnam. Lyle Coolmetcher. I don't know if he's going to be here or not. At any rate, there would be 2 instructors along with the platoon. One would grade the platoon leader advisor, the platoon leader, student platoon leader. The other would grade the platoon sergeant advisor. So, platoon sergeant. It was the platoon sergeant advisor who graded, or platoon leader advisor who graded students. So the students were constantly getting graded, and you had to pass so many patrols. You get 4 or 5 or 6 patrols during the 8-week period, and you had to have a passing grade on most of them. And none of the instructors should have flagged you as not being suitable or competent. So it was rough. By the time you got done, your eyes were just hollowed out, and your cheeks were hollowed out, and you looked like death warmed over, but you felt like you could conquer the world after finishing Ranger School.
All right. Now, after all of that, do you get a break before you go to Vietnam?
I had 30 days leave.
Okay.
And my wife and I got her stuff moved back. She was going to stay with her parents in Grand Island. She had a job lined up there as a dietitian at a local veterans center. And so that was a safe place for her to be. I think we took a week and drove to Las Vegas and had some fun. And then it was get on an airplane and go across the pond.
All right. Where did you fly out of?
San Francisco,
Okay.
actually Oakland,
Yeah.
Army Air Terminal, I think is where I was living.
And where did you land in Vietnam?
Let's see, there was Tan Son and
Long Binh and Bien Hoa are the three around Saigon.
Long Binh, Bien Hoa, and Tan Son. I landed at one of them and took a bus in the middle of the night, like 3 a.m., through a civilian area, and the kids were throwing firecrackers because they knew all the people on the bus were new incoming folks headed out to combat units. Went through, I guess, about 4 or 5 days of training, administrative paperwork. Part of it was acclimation training, getting used to the heat and humidity of Vietnam, which were impressive. And then the final day, the orders were posted on a bulletin board, and because I had gone to jump school and I was airborne qualified, I had written down I was interested in the 173rd Brigade or the 101st. And I think the 173rd was either out of Vietnam at that time, or they were about to go.
About to go, yeah.
And so I got orders for the 101st, was told to go hop on a C-130 and fly up to Phu Bai, which was the airfield, an old French airfield, southeast of Hawai'i, that served as the main airfield of the area. Right now it's the international airport for Hawai'i.
Okay. Yeah, and that's where the division was headquartered.
Yes, the division was there. They had Camp Eagle, Camp Sally, and Phu Bai Combat Base, I think, were the 3 brigade areas. And I think Camp Eagle also was the division headquarters. Was there.
And you had Camp Evans a little farther north that was
Camp
third brigade
Evans, I
headquarters.
left that one out. Yes, Camp Evans.
Okay. So did you only then find out what unit you were going to right at the end of that, or right before you flew up there?
I think I was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 501st for sure. I didn't find out what company I was going to be assigned to until I reported into the battalion headquarters. Got there one day and was told to report to Bravo Company's orderly room, which I did.
And roughly when was that?
I arrived in Vietnam the day before Thanksgiving, '69, and this was about a week later, which would have been the first week of December.
Okay, so very end of '69. All right. Now, where was the company at the time you were assigned to it?
The company, excuse me. I didn't get assigned to a company until about a week later.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I was told to go out to where the battalion was located, which was Firebase Bastogne, which was on Highway 547, about halfway to the A Shaw Valley. I was told to report to the battalion commander, who was Lieutenant Colonel Bobby Brashears, when I got there. And I got there by Jeep down Highway 547, went to the battalion talk, identified who I was, and then I was to report to Colonel Brashears. And I did, and he said, Lieutenant Worrall, glad to have you here. I know what you want, I don't have it. I don't have a rifle platoon for you. I found out later he was lying. He actually did. But what he wanted to do is he wanted me for about 4 or 5 or 6 days to be the Tactical Operations Center radio operator for the graveyard shift. He wanted me to take it from 6 p.m. at night until 6 a.m. the next morning, because he wanted me to learn the radio trafficking standard procedures, the call signs, the routine that everybody went through, doing a situation reports, sit rep every hour out in the field. And I actually sat in the talk at the radio bank doing that while he slept in a cot about 15 feet away. So he was listening to me every night for the next 3 or 4 nights to make sure that I was picking up on the things I needed to. And it wasn't more than 3 or 4 days, and he came to me one day and he said, Lieutenant Worrall, you need to pack up your rucksack, get your rifle, you're going to take over the 1st Platoon. I've relieved the platoon leader because he got his platoon lost too many times out in the field.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, boy, Ranger training really paid off, because one thing you have to do in Ranger school is know where you are. Because the instructors, particularly when you're in a leadership position, they come up, they plop their map out and say, "Where are you, Ranger?" And you can't go, I'm here, sir. You get out a pencil, "Where are you, Ranger?" And you have to pinpoint exactly where you are. So a resupply helicopter came out, picked me up, along with sea rations and other logistical resupplies from the platoon. Took me to a position where a squad had come down from a mountainside, top smoke, and the helicopter came down, and it was just pouring rain. Dropped us all off, and we actually stayed in a squad-sized position there close to the road overnight through the rainstorm, and then went up the hill and linked up with the platoon the next day.
All right. And what was it like introducing yourself to the platoon?
Well, you get taught what to do in Ranger school, so that was great training, because the first thing that you do in Ranger school, when you're told, "Ranger Worrall, come here, you're the platoon leader. Here's your orders, take over." Well, you have to establish who's the other leaders in the platoon are. One of the very first things you do is check the security that the platoon is in to make sure that they're in a secure position, because from that point that you're appointed as platoon leader in training, you're being graded. So if you don't do that in training, you get written up for it. So the first thing I did was meet my platoon sergeant. I had him introduce me to the squad leaders of the platoon, and check their positions for the perimeter that they were in, which was a little bit ragged, but things in Vietnam were usually kind of ragged. And I found out where we were, or where they thought we were, since I knew the prior platoon leader had a map reading problem. And I confirmed where we were, and we had orders to move from that position to another position about 1 kilometer away, up and down some hills. And I took a couple compass headings and got a couple of back azimuths from hills that I knew where they were. And at the end of the day, we got to where we were supposed to go without getting lost. So it was a successful first day, and I was happy with that. And but it was quite a bit less formal than I expected from the training that I'd had back stateside. Everybody was pretty low key, and just let's get the job done and do smart things and stay alive.
Okay. And were the sergeants capable?
3 of them were. The platoon sergeant was a leftover from World War II. He was probably my size now or worse. He was not fit physically to keep up with a bunch of 20-year-olds. Something's running around the mountains of Vietnam. A couple of weeks later, I was feeling really comfortable leading the platoon, and I took them on an extended march up some side of some hills, not taking the easy way but the hard way to see what would happen. And he blew a gasket. He came up and he said, "You're going to get the platoon killed doing these kind of things. This is not the way the platoon should be run." Next time we were back in the rear area, he found a rear job, and I had a young E5 that had gone through NCO Academy at Fort Benning, Ranger trained, and promoted him to platoon sergeant. We had a fabulous platoon after that.
All right. So this period that you're so again, kind of chronologically now, when is it that you're actually leading this platoon?
What I just described all happened December.
Okay.
So December, January, February, and March were the 4 months that I had first platoon.
All right. And then so that's in December, and now do you go back you come out of the field for a while and then get reassigned? What happens next?
Yes, in Vietnam with the 101st, they frequently brought entire companies to the rear at a place called Camp Eagle, which was an in-country R&R site, and the company would get to stand down in a very secure area on the beach. I said Camp Eagle, I meant to say Eagle Beach.
Yeah.
They would get to stand down for 2 or 3 days on the beach. There was plenty of beer available. There was a nice warm place to sleep at night, dry place to sleep. In December, January of Vietnam time frame was the rainy season. So out in the field, you were wet constantly, all day long. It rained at least once a day, usually more than once a day. When it wasn't raining, you were sweating so much that you were wet anyway. So to be able to sleep in a bunk, dry, get a hot shower, hot meal, soda pop or beer, whatever you wanted, that was really pretty special. There's also movies available that you could watch. They had, trying to think what the radio ham facility was, but you could actually make a radio call back to the States and talk to your loved ones back there. I tried that once. It was quite an experience because you're being handed off at least once, and more likely twice, between 2 ham operators. And I think when I was calling, there was one in Alaska and one in Chicago or something like that. And my wife was on one end, and she was saying, "How are you, dear?" And the one in Chicago was saying, "Your wife says, how are you, dear?" And the one, "Your wife says, how are you, dear?" And, "Oh, I'm fine, dear. How are you?" You know, and the conversation is just tortured going through so many interpreters in between. But it was an opportunity to talk.
Yeah. Okay. So after that first time out there in December, you got to go in for a stand down and then come back out?
Well, every couple of months is about average on companies doing that. The real way that companies got relief in the 101st was there were 4 rifle companies in a battalion, and every battalion had a fire base that they were in operational control of. So what the battalion commanders, I think, all did is they rotated whoever had security of the fire support base between the 4 companies. So 3 companies would be out doing reconnaissance patrols in the field, and 1 company would actually be on the fire base living in pre-prepared bunkers with overhead cover and actually sleeping pretty dry and getting, there was hot meals available every day. And that was home when you weren't at Eagle Beach.
Okay. So did you spend time then on Bastogne? Or?
I did.
Okay.
We operated out of Bastogne the entire time that I was first platoon leader through March.
Did you have much contact with the North Vietnamese in that period?
No, sir. I think I had 1 contact during that 4 months. It was a trail watcher, and it was in late February. So I had gone almost 3 months as a platoon leader in the field before we had our first contact. And it was probably the start of the activity around Ripcord, because it was to the northwest of Bastogne, which was towards Ripcord. And it was getting warm enough in February and dry enough in February that the North Vietnamese were moving supplies into the lowland areas. And as I recall, a helicopter had gone down on top of a hill. I don't know whether it had a mechanical malfunction or it was shot down, but a quick reaction force had gone in and rescued the pilot and taken the radios and machine guns off the helicopter. But my company, Bravo Company, was quickly picked up and put around the helicopter to secure the helicopter. So the company commander at that time was Captain Richard P. Dexter, who was a West Point graduate. And Captain Dexter had assigned us all portions of the perimeter based upon compass headings. And the third of the perimeter that first platoon had, my platoon had, was right along a ridge line that went down off of the hill to the area that was most likely the point of advancement of an enemy force that they were going to try to get up and get the helicopter or attack us. So the plan of attack was for us to get in, secure the helicopter 360 degrees, and then we were instructed to dig in because we're going to be there for the night. And I was told to start digging my platoon's defensive position in my section of the perimeter, but to be prepared to go on a patrol immediately. And members from the other two platoons would come stand guard in our holes as soon as we got started. So we went down the ridge line, and we didn't get 75 yards down the ridge line, and a trail watcher popped out from his hole and fired off a magazine and ran down the ridge line to the bottom of the hill. His firing at the platoon, I think, nicked one guy, a flesh wound in the leg. Only person out of 30 guys that his fire hit. We deployed online, and we had gunships in the area. We had TAC air along the lower area. We were dropping artillery on the other side. We probably blew off $30,000–$40,000 worth of ordnance on that one little trail watcher. I don't think we got him. He got down the police.
All right. So that was sort of your contact for.
That was the first and only contact that I had before Ripcord.
Okay. All right. So now you're getting kind of the end of February. Is that when you're reassigned, or March?
That happened at the end of February, and I was assigned as XO at the end of March. Bob Layton, my replacement, came in first or second week of April. I think it was April the 9th. He got there on April the 9th, took over the platoon, was instructed to put a squad out on ambush, and the squad got hit that night. So his baptismal fire was the very first day he was there. He didn't even know the names of his people, but out of that one squad, I think he lost 2 or 3 killed in action, and the rest of the squad was all shot up pretty bad. So that was his introduction. Much, much worse than mine.
Yeah. Okay. Now, as XO, what do you do?
Not a lot. Whatever paperwork needed to be done. Later, as contacts started occurring out in the field more frequently, I would get little notes back from the company commander that he was recommending so-and-so for a Bronze Star, or so-and-so needed to be written up for an Army Commendation Medal or a Soldier's Medal. And he would scribble something on the back of a C ration box top, tear it off, write the name of the person, and I'd get it back through the mail. And each decoration had to be written up in a particular way, and it had to contain certain elements in order to get approved at battalion, brigade, and division levels. So that was one of the jobs I did. I had a very competent first sergeant in the back, Jack Sullivan, also an airborne ranger and former Special Forces first sergeant. He had his stuff together, and he took care of all of the normal administrative day room, personnel reports, all that kind of thing.
All right. And so were you at Camp Eagle, or?
I was at Phu Bai.
You were Phu Bai.
Phu Bai Combat Base.
Okay. And so how long did you spend at that base?
I took over the first part of April. I went on R&R to meet my wife in Hawaii at the end of May. In June, more administrative kind of things. I had to go testify to court-martial for some guy who had been in my platoon originally and had come back and gotten a rear job at Phu Bai, and was arrested by an MP either leaving the Phu Bai Combat Base or coming back in. He was acting strange, and they searched him, and he had a strange substance in his pocket, and he got arrested, and I had to go testify at his court-martial. Probably the most interesting assignment I had was Colonel Benjamin Harrison took over as 3rd Brigade Commander in the middle of June 1970. And our battalion headquarters, we were in a different battalion, 2nd of the 501st, not the 2nd of the 506.
Mhm.
Our battalion headquarters got a message passed down that they needed to provide a lieutenant in starched fatigues, polished boots, and a clean Jeep to be an escort officer for a new incoming brigade commander. Turned out to be Benjamin Harrison.
Mhm.
So my only instructions were get him to his orientation meetings on time, get him back home to his hooch on time, make sure that somebody's taking care of shining his boots, and that he has cold beer in his hooch. And those were the orders I had. So as long as everything was done on time and the colonel was happy and he was on time, everything's good. So it was an interesting assignment. When I met Colonel Harrison, at that time retired General Harrison, Major General Harrison, after the war, it was to, I don't have his copy of his book here, but he had just written a book.
Yeah.
And I got a copy of it, and I wanted to get him to autograph it, so I met him down at Texas A&M Kingsville.
That could be, yeah.
Met him down there, and he was there, and Spalding was there, and a couple other guys there in the Ripcord Association were down there, and I got to meet them for the first time. And I took a copy of my orders to be his orientation officer down to him to show him, and I flashed him. I said, I don't know if you remember me, but I drove the Jeep with the shiny boots. And he laughed, and he said, okay, I'll sign it. And he said, how do you spell that last name? We only have one chance to do this correctly now.
Mm-hmm.
I just got a cramp in my leg.
All right. Now, so the time you're spending, you're in a rear area base.
Can you turn it
Okay.
up?
All right.
Just stretch this. Get rid of this cramp.
All right, so you're talking a little bit about Harrison, but I was moving beyond that. So you spend a fair amount of time, on a large base in the rear. Now, there's a lot of stereotypes about what goes on in Vietnam and rear area bases. And one of them is there's a lot of drug use. Were you aware of that, or was that going on?
As I said, First Sergeant Sullivan was our first sergeant in the rear. He and I bunked next to each other,
Mm-hmm.
and the barracks were troops that were back in the rear for administrative reasons, or new troops going out to the field were housed, was right next to where we slept.
Mm-hmm.
And Top Sullivan took care of all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we had that sort of stuff. Not to say that our guys didn't smoke weed,
Mm-hmm.
because they did, but we never had any problems with that. I never heard while I was there of any fragging incidents or any of that other kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then racial tensions is the other one that tends to show up a lot.
There were not that many black soldiers in our company.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one or two in my platoon.
I think the assumption is more that in the rear area bases, you'd have large numbers of them who are not in combat units, who might be going around and making trouble or that kind of thing. But that's, yeah. And the thing is, then that's part of why I ask, is that's not part of your experience, then.
It's not
okay.
part of my experience, but I've read about it. I've
Yep.
read lots of books about Vietnam, and I agree that's frequently reported as being a problem. But, for the guys out in the field, it just
Mm-hmm.
didn't matter. I mean, you were all there trying to live through your 365 days without getting shot up, and
Right.
you knew that you had to depend on the guy to your right and the guy on your left, no matter what color he was,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what his rank was, no matter where he was from. And if you couldn't, you had some problems.
All right. Now, what was your company doing during that period when your XO or doing other administrative stuff in the rear? What was happening to them?
Gradually, we were getting more and more involved in the Ripcord area of operation, although it was not known as Ripcord to us
Yeah.
in the rear at that time. All I knew was that Sergeant Sullivan would tell me, the company's getting some hot stuff now, and we're starting to get some wounded. And in April, and think it might have been even Bob Layton's guys that got killed in that ambush that I was telling you about. I was asked to go to graves registration, the morgue at Phu Bai, to identify some people that I knew. And that was a traumatic experience because it's already hot as hell anyway, and you go there and you know you're going to be seeing a dead body in the ends of a body bag, and you've got all the aromas and everything else, and yeah, that's him. And the graves registration officers getting you to sign off on paper that was so-and-so. Not something you want to do, not something you're trained to do. But
okay. Now, did you ever go out into the field in that period?
I did. Around May the 1st, May the 2nd, I had been in the rear area about a month, and I was board stiff. And we had 2 or 3 replacement troops to get out to the Ripcord area. The name of the fire base was Granite. And our guys had been southeast of Ripcord in an area that had been affectionately named Re-Up Hill. That's where Bob lost his squad. And we had been coming in to replace Alpha Company. 2501's Alpha Company was named Hard Luck Alpha because they got torn up really bad on Re-Up Hill. Bravo was put in there to help them out, and we got hit. When Alpha left Re-Up, they went to Granite. They were attacked on Granite as well and lost quite a few men on Granite. We were moved from Re-Up Hill to Granite to take over to them. They were put on what was supposed to be a very easy fire base that was actually out of the Ripcord area. And that particular night, I can't remember the name of that fire base, but the fire base was overrun, and they lost.
Is that Catherine?
No, they lost 27 to 30 American troops killed in action. Some of them, the sappers had gotten in and blown up some fuel rivets, and the fuel had gotten into some of the foxholes and actually burned the occupants alive. It was a terrible thing. That was Alpha again that was there. Bravo was all in that area, in the area of Re-Up Hill, the area of Fire Support Base Granite. Layton has told me after Vietnam, when I got to visit with him, that they would be up on top of the hill that overlooked Ripcord. What was that called?
Well, there's several of them. 1000 is one of them.
No, the big one, Cockmune.
Cockmune Mountain, yeah.
Yeah, Cockmune Mountain. He actually had a patrol up there. Parts, in some cases, all of the 2nd and the 501st Battalion were under the operational control of Harrison and Harrison's predecessor during that entire Ripcord area.
Yeah, it's Bradley. It was before him, yeah. Okay, so where does your R&R trip fit into that schedule?
May 25th, okay, was when I went over, and that was about the halfway point of my tour in Vietnam, and we'd already agreed, my wife and I, that go through 6 months, schedule it, because I could have taken it any time during that period, but a nice halfway break.
Okay, and then when do you get back?
A week later.
Okay.
That interesting thing about those plane trips, I think I left out of Da Nang to go and came back to Da Nang. I mean, the plane going from Da Nang to Honolulu was raucous. Plane coming back is totally silent, just like the plane going to Vietnam from Oakland Army Air Terminal.
Right. Okay. So now, when you get back, which job were you in?
I was still the XO at that time.
Okay.
That was about 2 weeks before I was the escort officer for General Harrison. Colonel Harrison.
Okay. And then, what impression did you form of Harrison at that point?
He was a strike-looking officer. He was all business, and he didn't talk a lot. And I wasn't used to talking to full colonels, so I didn't talk a lot. I just said, yes sir, no sir. Can I do anything for you, sir? But he was all business and very well respected by everybody that I talked to.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then you switch jobs. Okay, or that you had that job, and then you go back to being XO, or do you now go out to the platoon?
That job was kind of a duty assignment.
Yeah.
It wasn't an official assigned
right.
position. So when I finished that, it was end of June, just more of the same XO kind of deals until I was told to go take over 2nd Platoon early in July and go back out in the field.
All right. And now what was that like?
Other than the fact that I was past the halfway point and had gone on my R&R, I'd have been a lot more enthusiastic about it earlier during my tour in Vietnam than I was at that point. You start doing your short timer calendars as time approaches for you to go back, but I wasn't averse to it. I was basically didn't have any time to do much of anything other than get my rucksack together and make sure that my weapon was sighted in. And I met the troops at Camp Evans. That's where the 2nd of the 506 was, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I got in there the 9th or the 10th of July and took over the platoon. Was told immediately to send 2 of the guys to pick up a flamethrower, an old World War II or Korean War flamethrower, because we were going to be going on an assignment where the battalion commander was certain we were going to run into bunkers. And he didn't want to get bogged down in bunkers because we didn't have a whole lot of time to get the assignment done. The assignment that we were going on was we were to come up the backside of Hill 1000, find where the mortars were that were driving 2506 crazy on Ripcord, and destroy them. And it was an interesting assignment. We were to combat assault in on the hill just west of 1000. So you've got Ripcord here, and it's at 927 meters. You got Hill 1000 directly to us west, 1,000 meters away. And then the next hill is around 1,100 meters, and it's about 1,000 more meters away. So it's 2,000 meters from Ripcord, and 1,000 meters from the backside of Hill 1000. So the assignment we had was Bravo Company, Charlie Company, the Battalion Recon Platoon, and the Battalion Command Post, including Lieutenant Colonel Livingston, the Battalion Commander. We're going to combat assault into this hill just west of Hill 1000. Meantime, Alpha Company was going to go to the northwest and be combat assaulted in to an area called Triple Hill. And on the 14th of July, Bravo, Charlie, and Recon Platoon were to come down the side of the hill to this area at the base of Hill 1000 that was at the base between the two mountains, and link up with Alpha that was going to march over from Triple Hill. 3 companies are going to link up. Recon Platoon is going to put them online at the base of the back of Hill 1000. And once all 3 companies are online, they're going to combat assault as a 3-company attacking force at the side. And so that's almost crazy. Having just gotten out of Ranger School and having gone back to Ranger School as an instructor, if somebody had proposed that at Ranger School, I would have.
So what was fundamentally wrong with a plan like that?
There's too much going on for that to have any chance of happening. First off, you got to get 2 entire companies plus down the side of one hill, link up with another company coming from a different place. This is all forested area. I mean, this is all jungled area.
Yeah.
You're going to link them up at a point and spread out. You know, if all 3 companies were at full strength, that would be 90 to 100 men in each company, so you're going to have 250 to 300 paratroopers that you're going to line up on line. What's Charlie doing while you're doing this? He's going to let you do this. And then you're going to come up the side of the hill, backside of Hill 1000. What if one of the units gets tied up in combat? What are you going to do? Break off one of the other companies to come rescue them? How are you going to get up to the top? I just didn't know how that was going to work.
So it's the kind of thing that works well when you're just drawing lines on a two-dimensional sheet of paper.
Yeah. Well, it does, but you know, Otis Livingston, his previous assignment before going to Vietnam was as a Ranger Department commander.
Should have known better.
Well, I would think so. I don't know whether that was his idea or somebody else's idea, but that.
So what actually happens when you try it?
Well, what actually happens is that we combat assault into this hill on the afternoon, midday of the 12th. We all dig in around the hill. Here you got 2 full companies plus the recon platoon plus the battalion CP all digging in on this hill. The 13th, the entire day, the forward observers are bringing in artillery attacks all around this area. They're bringing in fast movers, phantom jets. I mean, we actually sat there on the side of the hill watching these jets come in and drop their napalm and their high explosives.
All right, well, you're going to pause right here because this is a tape and it is about to end. Okay, so we are talking about the preparation. You've got preparation going on for the attack against Hill 1000, some artillery aircraft and so forth going in.
That's exactly right. So on the 13th, all day long, nobody did anything except watch the FOs work all of the artillery and the air support that they could around the hill that we were on and on the back side of the hill that we were going to attack. So we had 50% watch that particular evening, the evening of the 13th, morning of the 14th. The entire battalion was told to wake up around 5 o'clock, get all their stuff together, and at 6 o'clock or shortly thereafter, first light, beginning in morning nautical time, the recon platoon was to lead the other 2 companies in the battalion CP down the side of the hill that they were on to link up with Alpha. The order of march was recon platoon, Bravo company. In between Bravo and Charlie company was to be the battalion CP and then Charlie company.
So you're all basically kind of in a column of sorts?
A ranger file is what it's called, and we never actually got fully into the ranger file because we got hit before we did, but yes, that was the concept of the operation. We were not lining up on line and coming down the side of the hill that we were on. We were following in a file formation the recon platoon down the side of the hill that we were on. Recon platoon made it 100 yards, 150 yards max. All hell broke loose at the front of the column.
And was this an area that had already been hit by the bombardment, or was that close enough to you that were not hit?
That was too close to be hit.
So they were just lurking there in a safe place for them.
Right. And if I were the NVA commander, I would have had them there to delay any kind of a force that came down. That's Cometcher again. He's probably here. He wasn't planning on being here. So we're going down this side of the hill with recon platoon leading. Bravo company, my company, is next in the line of march. I'm the first platoon in Bravo company behind recon platoon. So recon platoon gets hit. They had just gone over a little knoll on the way down, and they were going down. They ran into a bunker. All hell broke loose. A lot of automatic weapons fire, a lot of RPGs going off. I'm the first platoon next to recon platoon. I'm ordered to go down and help them break off the contact, extract the wounded, and get back. So we moved down the side of the hill. I got a really, really good look at the bunker. I could see where it was and the fire coming from it. But we got all their guys out, pulled them back. I think they had about a 20-man platoon, and they lost 8 or 9 wounded.
Now, had they gone in single file, or were they fanned out?
They were leading the battalion
Yeah.
behind them. What kind of a formation they used, I don't know. But most of the areas in Vietnam, in this part of Vietnam, if you're going down the side of the hill, you've got precipitous drop-offs and you've got a ridge line.
Mm-hmm.
So they were either moving single file down the ridge line, or they had deployed every other man on right, left, going down the side, so that they weren't all on the ridge line. They got hit. They lost about half of their platoon. We pulled everybody back to the knoll, the first little knoll that we'd gone over after we left the top of the mountain we were on. And that's where the battalion commander set up a CP. And we were all told to just go back and get in some kind of defensive posture, which we did. The battalion commander and the company commander talked about what they wanted to do. They brought in artillery, but the artillery couldn't get close enough to get these guys. Around 11:30 or 12 o'clock that day, they brought in a pair of Cobra gunships. And the Cobra gunships actually orbited in kind of a wagon wheel formation above this bunker, and just fired all kinds of minigun fire and 2.75 inch rockets down on them. That was far enough away from where we were that we weren't going to catch any secondaries from that. And they really lit it up pretty badly. I couldn't imagine, as a lieutenant that had been in Vietnam for a while, that anybody survived that. So immediately after the 2 Cobras left, the company commander said, okay, Worrall, you saw the bunker down there, and you have the flamethrower. I want your platoon to come online and go down and take out the bunker. Yes, sir. So I got an operations order to my platoon, and we had 19 or 20 guys total, counting the flamethrower team. So we put 1 squad on the left, 1 squad on the right, 2 guys that were running the flamethrower in the middle, and I came down with my RTO right behind them, because that was the pivotal point. We needed the flamethrower to light up that bunker. So I told my guys that we need to move as quietly as we can. We dropped our rucksacks behind us. All we had on was our load-bearing equipment, our weapons, and as much ammunition as we could carry, and many grenades as we could carry. And we went down as quietly as we could. Line rifle companies are not known for being quiet in the woods, but we had nothing banging around other than ourselves. So got on line, we went down, went over the top of the knoll down to where the bunker was. I got the platoon about 25 yards away from the bunker, and I gave them the hand and arm signal to stop, and they stopped and dropped down to 1 knee. I saw the opening of the bunker. I saw 2 bodies out in front of the bunker, and they looked like they were dead. They were in all kinds of strange, contorted positions. I went up to the flamethrower team, tapped the flamethrower. The guy who actually had the flamethrower in his hand, tapped him on the helmet and said, light him up. That was the last thing I remember. Because at the time I said light him up, an RPG came over and landed at our feet. The 2 guys in the flamethrower team, one of them had his left arm pretty much ripped off. It was hanging by a thread. The other guy was pretty badly wounded. I was knocked out. When I came to, there was an automatic weapons firefight going on with all kinds of noise. My left eye was closed. I had blood coming down the side of my head. Something was wrong with my left knee, didn't know what. And I started looking around, saw the 2 guys that were badly wounded. And I looked to my right and looked to my left, and they were wounded all up and down the line. Counting myself, half of our platoon got wounded right there. All we could do at that point was put down a base of fire and keep the NVA's head down. The infantry school solution to that is you don't lie in the middle of a killing zone, which is what we were in. But there was nothing else we could do. There was no way to get out of it. Within a matter of a few moments, half of my platoon that was not wounded were assisting the ones that were wounded back up the side of the hill. Layton's platoon, first platoon, my old platoon, was right behind us. They were sending guys down to help get the wounded back up. Meanwhile, this firefight continues to go. There's that one RPG is the only RPG that went off, the one that landed at my feet. But they had at least 2 or 3 AK-47s and an RPD light machine gun. The books that are on the table down in the room, if you read the log report, the operations report, it says that after that battle, the troops that went down to clean it out found 3 NVA dead and captured several automatic weapons, including a 51 caliber machine gun. I did not hear a 51 caliber machine gun down there. I think that must have been a different action. I think that operations report must have been wrong. But I do believe they had an RPD light machine gun. So anyway, the firefight went on for about 10 or 15 minutes. At some point, I remember looking to my right and there was nobody there, and looking to my left and there was nobody there. And at some point I remember something hitting my right foot. It was a ricochet AK round or RPD round, they're both the same bullet. It hit the top of the boot, went in, and broke one of the bones of my feet and went through. So I didn't know I had been shot. I thought I'd been hit by a rock or something that had gotten kicked up, because that was the sensation, just something that hard that it hit my boot. But I looked down a second time, and there was a little hole in the top of the boot and a little spot of red blood. I'm thinking, ooh, I think I know what this is, but you know, the rest of my foot's all there. I tried to put some weight on it, pressure on it, and I couldn't, because the bone was cracked. But if a full force AK-47 round had hit me, it would have taken half my foot off. So it had to be a ricochet. Plus, I've got the bullet, the doc that took it out, and it's got a corkscrew thing on the front tip. So I know it hit something before it hit me, because my foot didn't do that to me.
So you've been lying there and you couldn't move.
I was still firing.
Okay. So you were still actually trying to shoot back.
I was putting as much. I had 2 or 3 magazines full of tracer rounds, and I wanted to make sure that Layton's folks behind me knew where that bunker was, because some of them were not there before. So I was putting as much fire as I could on the bunker. And that's when my boot got hit by that AK. But at some point, I just decided, well, I'm the only one here in my platoon. I got another full platoon behind me, not to mention the rest of the company and another company. There's no reason in me staying here. So I started extracting myself up the side of the hill.
So you could still crawl even if you couldn't walk?
I was using my good foot to push the rest of me. And when I got up there, I kind of hopped to the aid station. And that was when I sat down, and the medic said, Lieutenant, I need to take that boot off. I said, do whatever you got to do. And he said, Lieutenant, you've been shot. Oh, okay, yeah.
All right. And then how quickly did they get you out of there?
They said, I was told to get on the next log bird that came in, and logistical resupply helicopters were coming fairly often, bringing ammunition and supplies. So the next one that came in, I hopped over and got on it. It took me straight to Ripcord. I saw Dr. Harris there. He said, Lieutenant, you've been shot. I said, thank you, doctor. And he said, I can't do anything for you here. Get out of here. And that's when Battalion Commander Lucas and his XO
Well, there's Koenigsbauer was one of his subordinates. I'm not sure if he was officially the XO, because there was another fellow, there was a Major Tanner at some point.
whoever had been there
Yeah.
the longest. Cause
Koenigsbauer was the one.
so
Yeah.
probably it's Koenigsbauer. But they both came in while Harris was looking at my foot and trying to get me to tell him what was going on. Well, ran into a bunker. So, you know, that one bunker, and back to looking at the bigger
Mhm.
picture, that one bunker held up more than 50% of an infantry battalion
Mhm.
because we were all going down the same
Yeah.
route down to the rendezvous point with the 3rd Company. So the whole notion that you can get that many infantry troops down, link up in a position they've never been to before, online in jungle, and come up the side of the backside of Hill 1000, which if you've ever looked at Hill 1000 on Google Earth, which I have, there's a big fissure right up the side of it. I'll show you after we finish the interview. There's a big fissure right up the side of it. I'm sure that's where the NBA were hiding. And there's no way we would have gotten through all of that to get to the top of 1000. But that was all supposed to happen in one day.
Mhm.
So this plan got along about 15 minutes, from 6 a.m. to 6:15 when the recon platoon got hit. And it did nothing after that point. And, you know, the rest of the 2501 story is that after I was wounded, they brought in more air support on that bunker. I think we lost a logistical helicopter that was shot down. The crew were evacuated. And I think the 2 companies spent another night on that same hill that we had been on for 2 nights already. And then the next day, it would have been either Harrison or Barry said, get them out of there. And the entire 2501 was picked up and taken somewhere else. I don't know where they were taken out. I was not there at that time.
That was the end of the effort to take Hill 1000.
That was the end of the effort. It's really a shame. You know, in reading the Ripcord book, the time to have taken it was the first attempt, the Bravo Charlie Company attempt that
It was Delta and Charlie.
that was Delta and Charlie.
Yeah.
But they got up close enough that they could hear the NBA talking on the top, and then somebody moved and they started throwing grenades down at RPGs at the guys that were there. That would have been the time to have taken because we were there.
Yeah, well, there was times when it didn't seem to have been occupied because you had people going over it before that too. But at this point now, they were building up and occupying more of these places, and there you were. All right, so they take you out off of Ripcord.
Right.
And where do you go next?
I went to Evans, saw a doc there. Lieutenant, you've been shot. Thank you. And I finally wound up at the evacuation hospital in Phu Bai, either 95th or 85th, whichever one is there. They said, you're going to have a surgery to get that bullet out. You can't do it here. They sent me to Da Nang. I remember lying on a gurney about 7:30 that evening. So I've already been going for 12 hours or more. I've been shot for 6 hours or more. But the triage, the guys coming in, and the bullet wound in the foot didn't get you at the first surgery, got you stuck at the end. So I guess they took care of me towards the end. By that point, I was pretty dehydrated. I remember feeling sick to my stomach and throwing up, but there's nothing to throw up. And, next thing I remember is waking up in a bed and somebody had put the bullet that they dug out of my foot in a bag on the side of my pillow. And so I was there about 4 or 5 days. An interesting thing happened while I was in that particular hospital is I guess they got word back to my wife and my parents stateside pretty quickly. And within 3 or 4 days, I got a phone call from my father. He was an Air Force officer, and he was in the communications squadron. That was his specialty. And I guess he knew how to get a hold of the hospital in Da Nang. And he's saying, "How are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm in a hospital here, but I'm otherwise doing fine. I had a bullet taken out of my foot. They're going to send me to Camp Zama, Japan." And the procedure at that point in time was that if you had a bullet and they opened you up to take the bullet out in Vietnam, they did not want to close the wound completely up for fear that you had an infection down there. So there was a very light suture to close the wound. I was taken to Camp Zama, Japan. They did a second operation, not to remove the bullet, but to make sure that there was no infection inside, and then they sewed me up there. I think I stayed a total of a week or two at Camp Zama, put on a C-141 from Da Nang to whatever the Air Force Base is around St. Louis. I can't remember the name of it. There's
Not from Da Nang then, from Japan.
Camp Zama, Japan, yes, to St. Louis. Spent an evening there, including a very nice trip to an officers club swimming pool for a barbecue or a picnic that was going on. And that was really great. And then to Fort Riley, and that's Fort Riley is where I was released for 30 days to join my wife at her home, come back, and I had a cast from above the knee down over the foot to immobilize the foot area, and the cast had to be changed every 30 days until they determined that the bone had healed. And at that point I was asked what assignment I wanted to finish out the rest of my career, and I said, I'd like to be an instructor at Florida Ranger Camp. And next thing I knew, I had orders cut for that.
Now, was that to finish out the original 4 years, or were you extending, or how was that working?
When I was commissioned, I was obligated to 2 years from my date of commissioning. When I enlisted, I was obligated for, I think, 2 years total. But when you get commissioned, you take on another 2 years.
Right.
So I was obligated until March of '71, and I extended at that point to try to get a regular commission.
Okay. And so you were sticking around longer in hopes that you would get that?
Yes. At that point in time, the pay and benefits for officers had risen dramatically from probably because of inflation going on at the time. Had risen dramatically, and a captain's pay and allowances, particularly captain on jump pay, was something that you could actually live on. It was nice. The reason I turned down the offer when I finished OCS was that at that point in time, lieutenants and captains were spending 12 months stateside, 12 months Vietnam, 12 months stateside, 12 months Vietnam. So I was newly married. I didn't mind going over for 12 months in Vietnam. That's what I had signed up for. But the idea of going back over every 12 months and re-exposing myself to all of that every 12 months wasn't something that I wanted to sign up for.
All right. So what was then that last assignment like?
It was great. It was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I had to check in through Fort Benning. Being in Ranger as an instructor, I was on jump status. I had to go requalify, which meant that I had to go let the folks at the airborne school abuse me a little bit. I'd just gotten out of a cast, and one of the things that they make you do before they say, okay, you're ready for jump status again, is to do PLFs.
Which are?
Where you jump from an elevated position, or you're swinging from an elevated position, you drop, and you have to land and do your 5-point landing on the balls of your feet, side of your ankle, side of your thigh, do the full 5. So this black hat NCO gets to be my turn, so I'm swinging along, he says drop, and I drop, and he says, Lieutenant, you're favoring that foot. That wasn't a very good PLF. said, well, I just got a bullet taken out of him, and that's the reason I'm favoring it. He said, get out of here, Lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of gave me a pass on that. But the foot healed completely with no problems, no issues at all. As a matter of fact, I took up long distance running in the 70s and 80s and ran several marathons. So I got no issues with that particular gunshot one.
All right. But now, at this point, you figure, would you have been able to stay longer, or was that just going to be the end of the road for you at that point?
That was the end of the road. I mean, I was a reserve officer.
Mm-hmm.
I had extended for a specific period of time. That extension was going to run out in April.
All right.
April of '72.
So now that you're out.
But
Okay.
for that period of time, I wasn't actually a ranger student anymore. I was a ranger instructor, which meant that instead of going out for 3 weeks and being out there cold, wet, and hungry for 3 weeks, I would go out and take my walk with the platoon that I was assigned to. I would show up 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning out in the field as a new platoon leader advisor. I would walk 24 hours with the platoon for whatever that platoon got assigned that day, grading 3 platoon leaders. And then I would come back, write up my report on the 3 platoon leaders, and I'd go home and I'd have 2 or 3 days off to recuperate. Rangers are out there still getting beat out, but as an instructor, that was pretty nice. And Eglin Air Force Base is by Fort Walton Beach, Florida. There's a lot of nice things to do there. My parents happen to have retired there, and several of the other ranger instructor officers were bachelors and had little bachelor pads down on the beach. So we had lots of parties also.
Okay. So now once that's all over, what do you do?
Well, as I told my wife, I said I've been a captain of infantry. Maybe I ought to go to business school and become a captain of industry. I don't know what else you do. I had a pre-medical degree. There was nothing. I did go back to the medical school that I had flunked out of and talked to the dean there, and he said, "Well, we'll take you back, but you got to go do work on a master's degree and take some courses and show us that you still got the academics to do better this time." And I said, "I don't have the time or the money to do that." Thanked him and I left. So medicine was out of the realm of possibility. So I thought business might be. And my wife at this point in time was still living in Nebraska. No, she wasn't. She had an opportunity to get her old job that she'd had while I was in Vietnam back in Nebraska. And so I applied to and got admitted by the University of Nebraska, which is not where I went to school. I went to Alabama. Started there in the summer of '72, and had to do some undergraduate courses in business, accounting 101, management 101, those kind of things. Got accepted into the MBA program there and graduated December of '73 with my master's degree in business.
Okay. Now, did the government help pay for any of that? Or?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The GI Bill was wonderful. Between what my wife was making in her job and what I was getting on the GI Bill, we didn't want for anything. It was great.
All right. And then what kind of job did you get?
When I graduated, I applied to a couple of different places. The job that I got was as a cost analyst at USAA, which is a military themed insurance financial conglomerate in San Antonio. And started there and did well, rose pretty quickly in the ranks there. That was during the time of Robert McDermott, who was the CEO and president, and he had a very expansive business plan for USA. he was a visionary and took USA from being a sleepy little property and casualty company to being a full financial services complex, including a bank and a brokerage firm and this, that, and the other.
There's a lot of them advertising on TV these days, so
Yeah.
yes.
And they're doing a lot of advertising. He did not take them that next step. At that point in time, they were exclusively open to officers, and they did not take NCOs or enlisted. And that was the next visionary that came along and said, you know, the number of officers being brought out each year is dwindling, and we're never going to grow larger if we keep that as the business plan. So they expanded it, saying, rightly so, that whether you're an NCO or an enlisted person, you're still a good insurance risk because Uncle Sam does your underwriting for you, which had been the original USA business plan, is that commissioned officers are expected to toe the line. They can't be having a lot of driving tickets. They can't be involved in a bunch of accidents. They got to pay their bills. They got to be upstanding people. Well, if you got that as your underwriting, you don't have to do a whole lot of underwriting in terms of saying, okay, we'll take this risk and not that risk. So the business has been great for USA. They've grown by leaps and bounds. Just as I was joining them, they had built a new building in San Antonio that was the largest office building west of the Mississippi at the time. I doubt if it still is, but it's a huge complex about a half a mile long, 4 stories high, and built to withstand most any kind of a bomb that might occur there.
All right. Okay. And so did you retire out of there or
No,
go on to somewhere else?
No, McDermott retired, and in the USAA mode of operation, they brought in a bunch of retired generals and admirals to kind of try out for who was going to be the next leader of the group. And I did not get along with all of those folks that came in. And one of them was a 4-star Air Force officer who had been vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and thought he walked on water, and he didn't. And I said that he didn't. So I was asked to leave.
Okay. And did you find another place?
I found several other places, nothing near as nice as USA, but I had a great career. I was a CPA and financial officer, had all kinds of licenses. And so, that's spam. So I was able to make a nice living, and my wife and I have had a nice life.
All right. Now to look back on the whole thing, what do you think you really took out of your time in the military, positive or negative?
Well, I told you earlier that I flunked out of medical school. I told you that when I got out of the Army, I went back to graduate school in business. I got straight A's in graduate school. There's something about somebody who's been through 3 or 4 years in the military, particularly if they've been in combat positions, whether it's Vietnam or somewhere else, that you're just a more mature person. You're more focused. You're more disciplined. You know what has to be done. You know how to do it. And when I went back to graduate school, at that time I was married and I had a daughter. The GI Bill was great, but it wasn't going to last forever. You know, I had to get something done.
Yeah.
I knew how to do it, and I did.
Well, it makes for a pretty good story, so I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to share it today.